Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, and Penny Nance, CEO and president of Concerned Women for America. Thank you both for coming here today. I think it's fair to say you're united in the dignity of women and caring about them in a moment that they may not have foreseen would come into their lives. So thank you for coming to have the conversation. Penny, I want to start here. Many of the marchers I talked to said this is just the beginning, getting rid of Roe, and that's something that the White House finds alarming. This is what the president said in a proclamation this week about the Supreme Court overturning Roe. He said, "Never before has the court taken away a right so fundamental to Americans. In doing so, it put the health and lives of American women across the nation at risk." So opponents of your work, including the president, say you're actually hurting women by this work.
Well, let's remember the pro-life movement has always been led by women, starting with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who in their paper, The Revolution, called it, sadly, child murder. You had women like Alice Paul, who said that abortion is the ultimate exploitation of women. And then now, the pro-life movement is led by women all over this country. Concerned Women for America have worked to protect women and their children from the very beginning. We have marched to the Capitol. We have gone and advocated for our position. We've gone to the state capitals, and women have gotten elected to advocate for this position because we believe that in the dignity of human life, there are two lives at stake in this question, and we want to love them both. There was a poll that just came down, a Marist poll, that said 90% of people want to protect the babies and their mothers. People recognize this as a life. Roe wasn't settled because people knew in their hearts there was a baby at stake.
And so now we have all these state fights, and we have different things that we talked about. The administration has taken steps to make sure that women have more access. The FDA not only now allows abortion pills through the mail, but this headline too, that now retail pharmacies from corner drugstores to major chains like CVS and Walgreens will be allowed to offer abortion pills in the U.S. under a regulatory change that was made by the FDA. So available through the mail. There's no prohibition on women traveling across state lines. So is there a problem with access in 2023?
Yes, I mean, there is a problem with access for sure. There was actually a problem with access even when Roe was on the books. But I think what we're seeing here is millions and millions of Americans, particularly women, woken up after Roe was overturned to this idea that many had taken for granted, that a decision so fundamental, so personal, so life-changing, such as whether to terminate a pregnancy or to carry a pregnancy to term, was now not going to be their own decision, that instead it could be made by politicians and not be made by the person themselves with their family, with their doctor, with their God, but instead could be determined by their state legislatures or their governors. And that's why we've seen this wave of activism where people are saying in states, not just super liberal states, we're also talking like Kentucky, Kansas, states where through ballot initiatives, people are saying we want to ensure reproductive care access. We want to make sure that reproductive care, including abortion, is still available, and it is up to the person themselves to determine whether or not to terminate a pregnancy.
Both of you have mentioned the fact that this did go to the states, and there were ballot initiatives. There were different places that we covered and talked about how people have voted on this. I remember, Penny, talking to you years ago in 2016 when President Trump got into the primary. A lot of pro-life leaders were very worried about him. They weren't sure where he was going to be. You wound up calling him the most pro-life president in history. Then after the midterms did not go as well as expected for the Republicans, he said this: "It wasn't my fault that the Republicans didn't live up to expectations in the midterms. It was the abortion issue, poorly handled by many Republicans, that lost large numbers of voters." So what's your response to that accusation that this issue actually hurt at the polls?
Well, of course, the pro-life movement is very grateful to President Trump. He appointed 3 constitutionalist justices that Concerned Women for America worked very hard to get confirmed, and I even called him after the overturn and thanked him for that. But we just basically disagree. What we saw happen was Republicans listening to the consultant class, running away from the abortion issue, being told only to talk about inflation and Joe Biden, and being outspent 35-1 in this issue. The other side spent $391 million on ads to Republicans' piddly little $11 million in ads. The other side painted them as extremists when the real extreme opinion on this is the other side that says abortion should be legal anytime, any reason, any number, all paid for by the taxpayer. We know that is not the position of the American people. This question has been returned to the American people, and we are happy to advocate for our position and go state by state. And that's the next step. That's the next phase, is what Steve Scalise said at the march.
Yeah, and there are things that are still happening here in votes on Capitol Hill as well, and there's talk about a national ban or a national codification. But a couple things the House has already voted on, again, in the control of the GOP now. They voted on a resolution to condemn attacks and violence on pregnancy centers and pro-life organizations. Only 3 Democrats out of more than 200 voted yes on that. There's also a bill that would have called for medical care for a baby that survived an attempted abortion. Only 1 Democrat voted for that. Elizabeth, why vote no on those kinds of measures?
You know, I haven't seen the particulars of those bills. You know, I think we should condemn violence on, you know, all activists who are, you know, people who have been subjects, threat subjects, and danger to people who are trying to facilitate abortion care. So, but I think, you know, one of the pieces of legislation that I find really interesting for this moment is actually the Respect for Marriage Act that passed with bipartisan support in the last Congress. And I think what that showed is that with overturning of Roe, people woke up to the idea that other rights that they thought were deeply embedded in constitutional principles of equality and liberty, like the right to choose abortion for oneself, including marriage equality for LGBTQ Americans, interracial couples, they saw that those could be on the chopping block too. And that's why this legislation that would protect the marriage equality that we have come to expect from our constitutional rights into law. So I think we're seeing a great awakening of people recognizing that if this Supreme Court isn't going to recognize the full spectrum of equality and liberty that was supposed to be guaranteed to us in the 14th Amendment particularly, that they are going to need to use other channels like the congressional enactments that I just talked about, and like their ballot measures. You know, we the people are coming back to say, we need equal citizenship stature. We need to be able to come to the public square as people who can make fundamental decisions about our own bodies, about our own lives for ourselves.
Yeah, it sounds like with Roe over, the one thing you both agree on is that the issue's not over. Like, we're just going on to the next phase of it.